Thank you for listening to the BeCause in Effect podcast. My name is Nolan Bicknell, and I'm now joined by Pat Mainville. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Pat.
Thank you for the invite, Nolan.
It's my pleasure. I mean, I've known you for a few years now. We've interviewed you for the radio show, and you've been at many, many events for the foundation. But maybe before we get into how you were connected with the foundation, maybe just talk about pretty much every podcast I've been doing for the past 6 months has been asking, so how has COVID been for you? And as a principal of one of the schools here in Winnipeg, I think you have a pretty unique perspective because that's absolutely crazy. So maybe how's your last, year and a half been, and how have you been holding up just generally?
Generally, it's been quite the event. I had to realize real quick just how flexible and how planning at the last minute is needed, especially in the educational field, and with COVID and planning for student learning, and how to best support our parents and students and staff through that process also. So just realizing that it is what it is, and you just got to make the best of it, right? Mm-hmm. To support everyone in general.
Yeah, for sure. So what's the general sort of feeling of the teachers and the students, and like what vibes are you getting when you're communicating with some of the parents and teachers and students over the last little bit? Like, how are people holding up generally?
You know what? Our parents have been so supportive. Being able to move to remote and having remote meetings with parents. I think we've had the highest number of parents engaged with meetings and talking about student learning than we ever have. And that says a lot coming from an alternative high school. Mm-hmm. So we've really had a positive impact of student support and parental support during this time. But we came out with very engaging activities for our families, to get them engaged and to stay connected. From our paint nights, we had a paint night with our families. We sent home like a Go Fresh box of food that they could participate with along with the paint night that evening with us. We were at the school eating with them online, and then we went right into the paint night with Jackie Travers and with our families, and we've had the most amount of families engaged in that online connection, which really helped with supporting our students and that learning, because parents were forced to also come online too, and our students helped them through it. So therefore, we were able to connect with our families.
Yeah, I've kind of heard from multiple people that, it wasn't all bad, because now you get to stay home. It's a little more engaged, as you said, and it's a little more like not forcing parents, but I mean, you're in the same house. It's like, hey, what are you working on? And could you talk a little bit about the positives maybe that have come from this and in this crazy time that you're noticing from your kids and parents?
I think the positives is that we've had to kind of dropped that formalized form of educational type of settings, mm-hmm. because now you're on this online setting and you're being supportive and asking parents, what do they need, right, as parents to support their children. And it was very open and very raw that we were able to bring in community resources, online resources, and bring them in as part of our meetings to help support parents. So we were able to see a different side and connect with our parents and students in a different way throughout the whole COVID experience.
Right.
as a
So,
school.
well, right. You're able to almost strengthen. I mean, nothing is going to replace being in the room with someone sitting
Mm-hmm.
across the table and looking into their eyes. But there is the opportunity to strengthen those community connections. And how important is that coming from a education background? But just in general, how important is it to have these communities, have these connections, and maintain them in such a crazy, crazy time?
Um, well, we had to make those connections to be able to support our parents and students. They were very vocal on their needs, and our whole school is based upon empowering our families and our students to be able to give them strategies and tools so they can be successful. So we stepped it up, and our staff was very good at communicating and addressing those needs, to the effect that they built a whole school mental health plan this year,
Mm.
which is something that was very helpful for everyone, for staff, for students, for parents, and for our community. It allowed us to be able to reach out and branch out to various community organizations based upon the needs of our parents and our students.
That's huge. I mean, I think I read that you got your education degree in 2000, back in 2001. Is that accurate?
Yes, yeah.
So you've been in the game for 20 years now.
Probably a little longer
Or
because I
longer?
started off as an EA
Mm,
in 89.
wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I was
So
an EA for 5 years
so
before I decided to go to university.
so your perspective on this will be pretty interesting and unique, I think, because I mean, just going back from when I was school, the words mental health weren't said once, I think, in my 12 year, 13 years or whatever in regular school. How have you noticed the priorities change and evolve for kids and for parents and for teachers, quite frankly, when it comes to mental health and focusing on that over your career of 20, 30 years?
Yes, I think, well, I think in general it has improved across the divisions, but I think as part of my background as being an Indigenous educator and an Indigenous person and looking at the whole person,
Mm,
spiritually, mentally, physically, that it has played a role throughout my whole career to be able to support the whole being, which includes a mental health piece. Um, one of my beliefs that comes to mind is that you have to know who you are in order to know where you're going. So
mm.
being able to do that inward work to be able to empower yourself um, plays a huge part in my beliefs in education. So I've always had that innate um, passion to be able to support students and parents.
Well, that transitions us
Yeah.
well. Yeah, that sort of segues us nicely into your centennial essay that you wrote for the Winnipeg Foundation. Our listeners can read it at www.wpgfdn.org/next100. And the intro from that essay is, who am I? Where do I come from? What is my purpose? Where am I going? And those questions raised by Justice Murray Sinclair and on his work in Truth and Reconciliation. Maybe I'll let you describe your essay a little bit. What motivated you to write it? I mean, obviously being asked by Stacy or whoever asked you, but maybe just take me back to when you were first asked and you were reflecting on what you might want to say looking forward for Winnipeg's Next 100 and how that all came together for you.
I think basically it's about my life and my beliefs and my passions, but also education has played a huge role in my life, being coming from a family of residential school survivors and being a part of the 60 Scoop and being able to find out who we are in order to know where we're going, because that's something that someone had told me way back when I was a teen, when I didn't know who I was. And I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't know how to love myself because I didn't know who I was. So that's something that I've always instilled and worked towards at empowering our students or our youth throughout the years in education, in all the work that I do. That it's been a part of me. Like it's not even work. It's more of a passion that I want to share. I want to be able to create voices. I want to be able to empower our youth so that they are successful, because I know that coming from my background, a lot of our youth don't have that opportunity or that time to be able to reflect and learn. I'm just thinking in the past year, one of our graduates who her family, they never talked about the residential school, but their family was a part of the residential school and they've never talked about it. And she was graduating and didn't even have the opportunity. Like she says that they never spoke about it and that she didn't know much about it. So one of her big final assignments was learning about the 60 Scoop and residential schools. And it elevated her and empowered her to think about how she was going to break cycles in our family. And that's something that's almost like a light bulb going off, because once students find out about that and learn about that, it does break cycles. And it might not affect them right then and there when they're that young, but it will trigger them in their 20s to be able to want to break those cycles for the next generation.
Yeah.
So that's one of my passions.
For sure. And I think so much of it is like, once you learn sort of the actual history and the family history and everything that comes along with it, you can say like, oh, that's why that happened. Or that's why I respond to that situation like that, or whatever the case may be. And every situation is obviously different. I mean, your history with parents and cousins and brothers and sisters and extended family all being a part of the residential school system, the last however many months it has with these rediscoveries of all the remains must have been so
very triggering.
Impossible to go through. I mean, I'm sorry to bring it up again and just sort of rehash all these things, but I mean, what was that like, seeing these things happen? And what's it like seeing now the sort of mainstream consciousness waking up to what your family and you have known for so many years? Like, what's that like, seeing people be like, oh, that's, you know, what's actually happened and what's going on? Like, are you, what's going through your mind when you see all that go down?
I think that, like, I've been in education for the last 20, 25 years or so. And things have changed, but haven't changed enough. When they brought up the discovery of the 215, yes, it was a big shock, and it did wake up a lot of people. But now we're going into 5,000, 6,000, and those numbers are just going to go up. We need to keep on talking about it. We need to put action behind what we're going to do as a community, as a collective community. What are we going to do about this? What are we going to do to make change? And as an Indigenous educator, and I believe other Indigenous educators, we shouldn't feel the need to try to validate why teaching this is important.
We're past that point. We're past the point of
well, I hope so, but sometimes that's not always the case.
Right.
And we need to keep on talking about it with everyone around us. And we need to be able to share and also stop conversations that go against our collective history.
Right.
Right? To be able to build change.
Yeah, one of the sort of ways that the foundation is approaching this is the Reconciliation Grants Program. You're the chair of that committee that's sort of overseeing all that stuff. Maybe how did you get involved in that? What is the overarching goal for the committee, and what do you see in the future of how this granting program is going to sort of move us forward along the path to reconciliation?
Mm-hmm. With the Reconciliation Committee, what we were finding is that a lot of, oh my gosh, going back, I'm trying this was when the calls to action came out, and we wanted to be able to make a positive change within the city of Winnipeg and Manitoba. But we wanted to do it in a way that is respectful and mindful of the Indigenous communities, to be able to do it in a way that is respectful, using Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous peoples to be able to oversee and take a look at organizations and their work that they were going to commit to do. So when I came on to the foundation, I first came on as a community member participating in committees, and then eventually was asked to come on to the board. So when we started the reconciliation grants, one of the things that I did ask for is that we bring in community Indigenous knowledge keepers, but those that were in the community that knew community organizations, and that they come up with the requirements, but the criteria for these grants, looking at Indigenous knowledge keepers, looking at doing it in a way that's respectful, that they are following the 64 calls to action, but also taking a look at UNDRIP and using that as a way of looking at grants to see whether or not they fall into those criteria, but also to make sure that the grants were not one-offs, but something that can be carried on for long-term work, and that affected or that we were going to impact the Manitoban community in general. It wasn't just for Indigenous people. This was to be able to spread awareness and education throughout Manitoba. So with this wonderful group of people, oh my gosh, I was so honored to be able to work with them. They came up with the criteria and how we were going to do this. And it was an opportunity to be able to take a look at various organizations and groups and the work that they were committing to do.
It's gigantic. One thing I'm noticing a lot, and a lot of themes that I'm coming up against with various communities that of people that I've interviewed, is that so many of the problems and of the issues that we've had in the past is one group of people sees a problem in another community and then they impose their own solutions. Whereas I think a more modern way and more smart way and a more effective way of approaching things is allowing people to come up with their own solutions and then supporting those. Can you talk about that distinction and how people think that they're doing good, or they might have, good intentions, as as is the sort of buzzword. But it really needs to be led by the community themselves and then supported in whatever way they need. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah. This is exactly what I do at this school with the students. And this is what I share with my staff, is that we have to empower our youth or our community to be able to become their own heroes by giving them strategies and tools to empower and uplift themselves, to be able so that they can take themselves out of, or to make change for the betterment of the whole, so that they can be successful. It isn't for us to go in and save. That's not my job. I want to be able to teach those strategies and those tools. And that's what a part of the reconciliation grants was looking for. They wanted to be able to see that they were empowering, but also providing those strategies long term, not just a short term or a one-off. Right. But they were looking at how they can best support learning, because what reconciliation is education, really, and sharing that knowledge, right? So they go hand in hand when you talk about reconciliation and education pieces.
Well, Val Vince's piece at the Forks, education is the new buys, and
I love that.
So powerful, so incredible, and so accurate.
Amazing.
So accurate.
I could sit there and just read each and every one of those books. Oh, it's so empowering. It's wonderful to see.
It's incredible.
If anyone gets a chance, go down and take your tea or your coffee or whatever it is, your water, go sit there and take a look at all of those books. It's amazing how many books there were.
Yeah, it's a really cool piece for sure. I want to expand a little bit about what you were talking about before. Like, your job has to be so flexible because every single situation is different. You can't make a catch-all program that's going to, be the right application for every single person. And that's kind of a weird, space to be in, because you have to be reactive, but also proactive. And you can't, maybe just talk about how your skill set needs to be. So it can't be the same for it's not a one size fits all approach, right? It's a sort of holistic, each single person has their own set of needs and requirements and situations. But like, what's that like as an educator, knowing that you can't just, come up with a curriculum that's going to be a one size fits all for everyone, that each person has their own requirements and you need to adapt to each one?
Yeah, I think as educators, we do that automatically, is that we teach based upon the needs of the student. So we have to get to know who that student is, right? Which is why we also want students to get to know their own learning styles and their own needs, right? Because then they'll be able to help themselves and be able to advocate for themselves, right? And that's what we want our community members to be able to do also, right? To be able to advocate for themselves, to know what their needs are. But students especially, well, I'm in high school now. I did elementary for a long time, but even elementary students can do that. They know what their learning needs are. They can advocate based upon what they need. And that's what we do in high school also. I mean, maybe it's easier because I'm an alternative high school and it's in a smaller setting, but I believe that every teacher wants to be able to teach based upon student need. Right? Get to know who that student is and teach where they're at.
It's huge. Yeah. I remember going through school, and it was the same, the same lesson for all 35, 40 kids or whatever it is. Right. And I used to think this when I was a kid, but I really think we don't give kids enough credit when it comes to like what you're talking about, being able to advocate for themselves and understand what they need. And I don't know what the reason, I mean, it might just be coming from the, like, kids are meant to be seen and not heard, right? Like, don't, and how have you watched maybe the evolution since you first started back in '89 as a TA to now, where kids have a little bit more agency and we're allowing them to sort of, be the controllers of their own destiny a little bit more, and how are you helping to empower that?
We are trying to empower our students to become independent thinkers, but also independent learners, right? And in order for that to happen, they have to know who they are as a learner and as a thinker, right? So it always goes back to, you got to know who you are, right? Yeah. In all aspects, not just your learning and your thinking, but who you are as a person, right? And to be able to love yourself is another thing.
Well, but then you're not just an instructor, then you're also a psychologist, a therapist, a parent, and sometimes
you're a jack of all trades when you're an educator.
So you have to hire, I love teachers in general, but you have to hire the best people to want to do that job. Like, what's it like sort of playing the admin side of things and trying to empower your teachers to teach them, like, hey, you're going to have some tough days when you're going to have to teach these kids like who they are, and there might be some tears, and there might be some yelling, and there might be some, sadness, happiness, all of the emotions. Like, do you kind of warn teachers about that, or do you let them figure that out on their own?
Do you know what? I think that comes with the school environment. Like, we built our mental health plan this year, and that's built right into our mental health plan for students to get to know who they are. But that happens in curriculum. That happens in our social studies curriculum throughout the grades. Who are you? Where do you come from? Right? You could just go another additional layer with that. So it is built into various curriculums. It's how you present it. And teachers have that opportunity to be able to be creative on how they do that. Being in an alternative high school, we have that flexibility, but other schools can do that because it's in the curriculum. It's built into the curriculum. So it's how comfortable you are at being able to add another layer or go a little deeper with that.
For sure. Yeah, education, I've been saying this for a while. It really seems like it's the solution to most of our problems, whether it's, the ability to read the media and the misinformation that's out there today and think critically and all the things that we're kind of seeing now bubble to the surface and the insanity that's happening all across the world. It's like education. We said it before, education is the new bison. Education really is the key to everything. When you have conversations with people who might not necessarily believe that, or might think like, oh, education has enough resources, we can allocate them to other things. How do you approach those conversations in a tactful way, and how do you not get frustrated working in this environment for 30 years when you're constantly fighting for resources, fighting for the ability to empower kids and all this stuff that's been happening for the last 30 years?
I think that if we focus on our students and individual student need, and we have that focus, that's
the path.
That is the path. And sometimes we don't need elaborate things. We just need to be able to teach to where that child's at. And I think sometimes it does take some extra work or some extra thought, but that's where our colleagues, our contacts come into play to be able to ask for help. And sometimes we don't know what we don't know. That's a huge piece to education, because if we believe that...
Oh, Patricia, you're touching the microphone a little bit.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. You're saying we don't know what we don't know. Can you expand on that a bit?
Sometimes as educators, we may get to a certain point where we think we know everything.
Right.
But not knowing what you don't know is a part of I mean, being able to acknowledge that sometimes we don't know what we don't know and be okay with that, and to be able to ask for help, that's another huge thing. But being open to being lifelong learners, and that's something that we all are, because I learn from my students, I learn from my staff. I don't pretend to be the knower of all, right? I learned from my parents. So I'm always open to learning and listening.
Well, that's one of the humility, right? It's one of the sacred teachings is like you can't approach a situation thinking that you know what the solution is all the time, right? You have to acknowledge that maybe I don't know everything, and I think there is maybe just sort of an traditionally there. I remember some teachers that I had that were just so not humble, and there was just no humility or empathy, or like they wouldn't listen. And I think you're talking a lot about just listen. Just listen. Sometimes just listen, and you can hear things that you wouldn't recognize. But yeah, maybe can you expand on how the 7 sacred teachings affect what you guys are trying to do at your school and what you've been doing in your career as well?
Yes, that plays a lot into our school. The last 2 years, it had been really difficult because it has played a huge impact on what our school does with community-based, and a lot of the being able to gather,
yeah,
right, and not having that interaction or that connection, because it's a different connection in person than you would online. And to be able to meet as a class makes it very difficult. But the 7 teachings definitely has a huge impact within our school. We utilize in everything we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's really disheartening and heartbreaking that those teachings and ideas along the way were attempted to be destroyed and attempted to be erased from history, because they're so beautiful and effective and touching. And it's like, it really boggles my mind that someone could see these ideas and these Indigenous ways of knowing and be like, no, that's not the way we should do things. Like, the arrogance required, first of all, is just insane. But then when it comes to, I've been talking to a lot of people about the environment and just how the Indigenous approach to the environment would have led us, or would not have led us, into the current climate crisis that we're in. I mean, do you think about that? I know climate and the environment isn't your area of expertise, but I'm just curious of your perspective when it comes to, you know, our relationship with nature and the environment, and how we're in the predicament that we're in, and why, and if we perhaps would have listened to the elders that knew how to maintain. Like, what are your thoughts on that? I'm kind of rambling a bit.
In regards to land-based knowledge or land-based teachings, I think that we always need to stay connected to the land in order to gain that humility that we're talking about. That arrogance is thinking that we're better than or know more than,
because we're separate from it, because we think we think we're separated from it. But when you realize that everything's connected, the humility is built in, because you are the environment. Yeah,
exactly. Our school does a lot with that land-based learning. We're actually on the first day of the school. When we come back, our staff will be taking a half day and connecting with the land and talking about how we're going to implement that throughout the school year, because we do a lot with sustainable development, but making those connections to those teachings for our students to be able to deal with mental health also, right? That connection to be able to deal with our own well-being, but using our curriculum to be able to get there also. So that's something that our staff will be doing on the first day of school. So I'm looking forward to that. And we're just going on a regular walkabout, right?
Huge.
But our conversations will be towards curriculum and connecting our students to that this year, and our commitment to that. So
I'm almost envious of the kids these days, because like I'm so happy that we're finally teaching the right things and walking in the right direction, right? Like what do you see for the future for the kids? Like it's only going to get better, I'm hoping. You know, are you optimistic? Where are you thinking?
I am optimistic. I am, because I think students are beginning to think critically based upon the information, because there's so much information being thrown at us on a daily basis through social media, through news, through all these different YouTube, whatever it is out there, right? But I think students are beginning to think critically, like really think critically, and are connecting with the land, and are putting thoughts, and are having those conversations with each other, and challenging each other's beliefs and biases. I mean, I see a lot of that too, which is really good to see. And that's changed over my 20 some odd years in education.
Yeah, well, just creating an atmosphere where challenging the status quo, or, you know, the biases or anything, is not only accepted but encouraged. Whereas when I went to school, it was like, do not question authority, shut your mouth and sit down, you know. And I didn't really respond well to that, but yeah, it's good. It's heartening to see that it's moved in a different direction. So at the end of our time together, I do a segment with all of our guests called the Just Because segment, where I ask the same 7 questions all about the causes you care about and the effect that it's had on your lives. You okay to go through those with me?
Yes.
Awesome.
Definitely.
All right. Question 1. What is the very first cause you ever remember caring about?
I think youth, definitely youth and education. And I think I've always kind of stayed along that path. I was a kid at Rossbrook House, and that's where my humble beginnings. I mean, I've had a history before that, being in this scoop and moving all over the States and having all that. But the first time I landed in Winnipeg, I landed at Rossbrook, and they've been a huge piece of my life, even to today. I mean, I'm still involved in that. So youth and education has always been a big part of my life. You definitely feel like you're built for this, right? Like everything in your life has led up to this point and you're just the perfect person to combine all those forces together. Beautiful. So question 2, if money and politics and logistics were no issue at all, and you just had an unlimited budget and unlimited time and whatever, you could just make it happen, what's the first thing you would do in support of your current cause? Build a lot of supportive drop-in centers for youth that had like-minded people that wanted to empower our youth with strategies and tools to be successful, to be able to break cycles. Getting back to the land.
It's huge. Absolutely. For sure. Question 3, what's the biggest misunderstanding or the biggest stigma about the cause right now?
I think that parents or students don't care, or youth don't care. I think that's a huge piece, because they do. It may be very surface level, looking like they don't, but they do.
Of course. You just have to unlock the key, like find the key to what they're passionate about, right? I think
exactly.
That's a universal thing. And probably the hardest job for a teacher is to find out, okay, what are you, like, not everyone's going to love math. Not everyone's going to love chemistry, science, like all that stuff. But there is something that you are good at, that you love, that you can, you know, be passionate about and dig into. And that's probably what the moment of teaching is all about, when you can, like, you know, unlock that potential, for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah, beautiful. Question 4, what's a recent victory, either personally or professionally, that you're proud of or happy to have achieved?
I think the last one was being able to visit my oldest son at his house They have 6 children living at home. And this was the first time that I've been able to visit them before since the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to see him as a father and as a husband and as a provider, do you know what? It made me so proud knowing that he's breaking cycles.
Mm.
You know, it just made me so proud because I've worked so hard at doing that, and I see that with all my sons,
mm-hmm.
with all my 4 sons. They've been really successful, but to be able to see him as a husband and a provider, and not as my boy, but as a man, and being able to have those sit down Sunday suppers with them and being able to participate in that with them, it brought tears to my eyes.
Oh, I'm feeling the same way. I think I got to call my mom after this. Yeah. Beautifully said. Yeah. Question 5. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
I think, to get to know who you are. And to be able to know who you are, to know where you're going. I think that's something that I've played over and over in my mind throughout the years since I was a teenager. Because as a teenager, coming from a home or parents that were residential school survivors, and knowing that trauma and not having the parenting or coming from a home, but having all that trauma and upheaval, and being able to learn that over the years and keep that as one of my foundational teachings, and yearning and going and falling back to that has helped me over the years to be able to achieve where I'm at, and to be able to keep that cause, because I want to be able to share that with our youth and empower them.
So 'cause nothing would make sense if you don't know who you are or where you're from, right? Nothing makes sense unless you know who you are and where you're from, and where your mom and dad are from, and where your grandparents are, all that stuff. Yeah, that's so important. Yeah, beautiful answer. Thank you. Question 6, what advice would you give your 10-year-old self if you could go back in time and talk to her?
I would say it's going to be okay.
That's a common answer. Yeah, so many kids need to hear that today still.
It's going to be okay, and learn to love yourself.
Such good advice. Yeah. Question 7, it's the hardest one. Most people seem to answer it as the hardest one anyway, but question 7 is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I think I want to be remembered as somebody who's passionate about youth and education, and somebody that just cares and wants to share that. It's not about making a name, it's about the work we do, right? And being able to uplift our communities. So
the world is lucky to have you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Thank you for all the work you do for the foundation. I'm sure I'll see you at another upcoming event and coming up, or wherever I'll see you next, and we can reconnect there. But thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for all the work you do, Pat, and I guess we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thank you, Nolan. This was great. Bye.